The millionaire laughed at the promise, certain she would forget. But fate returned her to him, adult, courageous, and surprising. Now it is he who trembles, seeing the love he failed to foresee, and he realizes that some promises never age. Before continuing, please like and subscribe to the channel. The first time Helen saw the Albuquerque mansion, she was only 6 years old. She remembered the imposing gate, the seemingly endless garden, the marble statues that guarded the entrance like silent sentinels. She held her mother's hand tightly, her small fingers intertwined with hers as they walked along the Victorian mosaic path that led to the service entrance. Mrs. Lucy, her mother, had secured the job after months of knocking on doors, sending resumes, accepting rejections. This position was more than just a job. It was survival. The house was located in Kensington Gardens, one of London's most exclusive neighbourhoods. There, every square foot was worth more than everything Helen and her mother owned together. The streets were tree-lined, quiet, clean. There were no shops on the corners, no buses passing by every minute, no smell of a street market or the sound of street vendors. It was another world. A world where people entered and exited imported cars, where dogs wore genuine leather collars, where children went to international schools and spoke English even before mastering Portuguese. Helen did not yet understand the meaning of that distance. To her it was just different, fascinating, frightening too, but in a way that made her want to look at everything with heightened attention, as if she were inside a movie or a storybook. The family matriarch, Mrs. Beatrice Albuquerque, was a woman of almost 70, elegant with an erect posture and a firm voice. She wore pearls around her neck. Even indoors her hair always pulled back in an impeccable bun, and she had that way of looking down on people that seemed natural, as if she had been born that way. She received Mrs. Lucy in the kitchen, explaining the house rules with clarity and coldness. Strict hours, absolute discretion, no visitors without authorization. And of course the daughter could accompany her mother for the first few days, but she should remain quiet, invisible, without disrupting the family's routine. Helen quickly learned what it meant to be invisible. It meant walking through the corridors without making a sound, sitting in corners where no one would notice, answering only when asked and even then in a low voice. It meant understanding that this space was not hers, that she was there by permission, by tolerance, and that it could end at any moment. But there was something in that invisibility that also protected her. Shielded by the indifference of her employers, Helen could observe, and she observed everything. She observed the way the family sat at the table, the way they talked about international trips, as if discussing going to the market, the elegance with which they held their cutlery, the naturalness with which they asked for things, and expected them to be immediately attended to. She also observed the paintings on the walls, the books on the shelves, the antique furniture that seemed to have stories of their own. The house had 3 floors. The ground floor was reserved for social areas, living rooms, dining room, reception rooms, a huge office that smelled of leather and varnished wood. The second floor housed the family's bedrooms, and the third, smaller floor was where the guest rooms and a private library were located. Helen never went beyond the first floor in the first few months, but she dreamed of getting to know that library. She dreamed of touching the books, opening them, smelling the pages. It was on a Sunday afternoon, when the family had gone out for lunch at the Royal Equestrian Club, that Helen finally climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Mrs. Lucy was busy in the laundry room, and the girl, curious and brave in that way only children can be, decided to explore. She ascended slowly, tiptoeing, her heart racing. When she reached the top, she found the library door ajar. She entered. The place was magical. Mahogany shelves covered the walls from floor to ceiling. There was a wooden ladder with wheels to reach the highest books, moss-green leather armchairs, an antique globe, framed maps. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows, casting golden patches on the parquet floor. Helen walked between the shelves, running her fingers over the spines of the books, reading titles she didn't understand, feeling part of something immense and distant. That's how he found her. Daniel Albuquerque was 15 years old at the time. He was Mrs. Beatrice's only grandchild, son of Mark and Camilla Albuquerque, who spent more time traveling, for work than at home. Daniel had grown up surrounded by butlers, drivers, private tutors, but with little genuine affection. His grandmother was strict, his parents absent, and he, amidst it all, sought something he couldn't name. When he saw the girl in the library standing in front of the classical literature shelf, with wide eyes and an expression of complete wonder, Daniel felt something strange. It wasn't anger that she was there without permission. It was curiosity, and perhaps also a bit of loneliness recognizing another loneliness. "Do you know how to read?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe, his hands in his jeans pockets. Helen turned, startled, her face flushed. "Yes, I do," she replied, her voice trembling. He smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was genuine. "Which book do you like best?" Helen looked around, lost. "I don't know yet. I've never had many books." Daniel walked over to her, took a book from the shelf, and handed it to her. "Then start with this one. It's about a girl who discovers a secret garden. I think you'll like it." Helen held the book as if it were a treasure. It was the first time someone from that house had spoken to her as if she mattered, as if she were more than just the maid's daughter. From that day on, something changed. Daniel began to look for Helen. Not obviously, but he always found an excuse to be where she was. If he saw her in the garden, he would go there with his guitar. If he crossed her in the hallway, he would strike up a conversation. He talked about his private school classes, about the classmates he couldn't stand, about the family plans he didn't understand. Helen listened attentively, fascinated not only by what he said but by the way he treated her, with respect, with interest, as if she were his equal, and she, little by little, began to speak too. She talked about the public school where she studied, about her friends, about her dreams of one day seeing the sea, of traveling, of studying at a university. Daniel listened with the same attention she gave him, and gradually, between stolen conversations and exchanged smiles, something was born that neither of them could yet name, but which both felt. Helen was 8 years old when she told him, with all the sincerity only a child can have, that when she grew up she would be all his. They were sitting in the garden, under the shade of an ancient oak tree, and Daniel was playing a soft tune on his guitar. She spoke without thinking, without calculating, just feeling. Daniel stopped playing. He looked at her, surprised, and then laughed. It wasn't a malicious laugh. It was disconcerted, almost embarrassed. "Seriously?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Helen nodded, serious. "Seriously." He was silent for a moment, then resumed playing. "All right. When you grow up, we'll talk about it." For Helen, that was a promise. For Daniel, it was a child's game. But neither of them imagined that those words would come back to haunt them years later. The following months were the happiest of Helen's life. Even living on the fringes of that wealth, even knowing she didn't belong to that world, she felt special, because Daniel saw her, and that was enough. Mrs. Lucy noticed, of course. Mothers always notice, and that worried her deeply. She knew that such proximity would lead to no good. She knew that sooner or later someone would put each of them in their place. And when that happened, it would be Helen who suffered. But she said nothing, because she saw her daughter happy. And after so much suffering, so many difficulties, so many nights sleeping hungry, seeing Helen smile was a relief she didn't want to interrupt. The trouble started on a Thursday afternoon, 3 months after that conversation in the garden. Mrs. Beatrice noticed that one of her necklaces had disappeared. It wasn't just any necklace. It was a family heirloom with diamonds and emeralds kept in a velvet case inside the bedroom safe. The safe had not been broken into. The key was in place. But the necklace was no longer there. The matriarch gathered all the staff in the dining room. There were 5 in total: Mrs. Lucy, Sebastian the butler, Mrs. Rose the cook, Marina the cleaner, and Mr. Joachim the gardener. All stood in a line while Mrs. Beatrice, seated at the head of the table, stared at them with that icy gaze that made anyone tremble. "Someone here knows where my necklace is," she said, her voice calm but laden with threat. "It's not a question, it's a statement, and I will find out who it was." No one said anything. The silence hung heavy like lead. Mrs. Beatrice rose, walked over to Mrs. Lucy, and stopped directly in front of her. "You have access to my room," You tidy my things, and you have a daughter to raise. I imagine the temptation must be great." Mrs. Lucy paled. "I didn't take anything, madam. I would never do that." "Then where is the necklace?" "I don't know, madam. I swear I don't know." Mrs. Beatrice turned to the butler. "Sebastian, call the police." The butler hesitated. "Madam, perhaps it would be better to investigate. First, it might be a misunderstanding, or perhaps you put it somewhere else and don't remember." "I did not put it somewhere else, and there is no misunderstanding. She took it, and she will return it or she will go to jail." Mrs. Lucy began to cry. Tears streamed down silently, desperately. "I didn't take it, madam. Please believe me. I need this job. My daughter needs me." "You should have thought of that before." Mrs. Beatrice turned and left the room, leaving everyone paralyzed. Helen, who was in the garden, heard her mother's crying and ran inside. She found Mrs. Lucy being escorted to the maid's room, where she kept her few belongings. The girl didn't immediately understand what was happening, but she saw the despair in her mother's eyes and felt her world collapse. "Mum, what is it? What happened?" Mrs. Lucy couldn't speak. She just hugged her daughter tightly, as if to protect her from everything, from everyone. It was Sebastian who explained, in a low voice, as he helped them gather their things. "Mrs. Beatrice accused your mother of stealing a necklace. There's no proof, but she wants you both to leave now." Helen felt her blood run cold. "But she didn't steal anything. My mother isn't a thief." "I know, child, but it's no use. The mistress has already decided." Helen broke free from her mother's embrace and ran. She ran through the corridors, climbed the stairs, looked for Daniel. She found him in his room, studying. She knocked on the door desperately. "Daniel, Daniel, help me, please." He opened the door, startled. "Helen, what is it?" "Your grandmother is sending us away. She thinks my mother stole a necklace, but she didn't. You need to talk to her. You need to explain that my mother is honest." Daniel froze. He started but couldn't continue. "Please, Daniel, you promised you would take care of me when I grew up. I haven't grown up yet, but you can help me now. Please." He looked at her, saw the despair in her childlike eyes, felt the weight of the promise he had made as a joke, and he also felt the weight of the surname he carried, his grandmother's expectations, the future that was laid out for him. "Helen, I don't know if I can do anything. My grandmother—" You can talk to her. You can tell her you trust my mother." At that moment, Mrs. Beatrice appeared in the hallway. She saw the girl clinging to her grandson, crying, pleading, and her face hardened even more. "Daniel, step away from that child now." He obeyed. He let go of Helen, took a step back. "Grandma, maybe you're mistaken. Mrs. Lucy has always been—" "Don't contradict me, Daniel. This conversation is none of your business. Go back to your room." Daniel looked at Helen once more. He saw the disappointment in her eyes, the silent betrayal, and he lowered his head. "I'm sorry," he murmured, before returning to his room and closing the door. Helen stood in the hallway alone with Mrs. Beatrice staring at her coldly. "Your mother has 10 minutes to leave this house. And you too. And if I find out you've taken anything that isn't yours, I'll call the police for real." The girl stumbled down the stairs, her legs weak, her heart broken. When she reached the maid's room, Mrs. Lucy already had their 2 bags packed. They were leaving through the back door when it started to rain. A heavy, thick, cold rain. They walked to the gate, were left on the sidewalk, and the gate closed behind them with a metallic, definitive sound. Helen looked back one last time. She saw the imposing mansion, the lit windows, the perfect garden. And she also saw, in one of the second-floor windows, Daniel's silhouette watching. He didn't wave, he didn't come down, he just watched. At that instant, with the rain drenching her clothes and the cold penetrating her bones, Helen understood something that would mark her forever. Fairy tales do not exist. Promises are worth nothing when a surname weighs more, and the kindness of someone who lives in a castle will never be enough to protect those who live outside. They took a crowded bus back to the outskirts of South London, where they lived in a rented room. The journey lasted almost 2 hours. Mrs. Lucy cried silently, her face turned to the window. Helen held her mother's hand and promised herself, with all the determination an 8-year-old child can muster, that she would never again depend on anyone's compassion. The following days were the hardest. The news of Mrs. Lucy's alleged theft spread quickly among the families in the neighborhood. No one wanted to hire her anymore. Doors closed one by one. The money they had saved ran out in a few weeks. Mrs. Lucy accepted informal jobs, odd cleaning gigs, anything that paid. But the accusation followed her like a shadow, and her body, no longer young, began to show signs of fatigue. Helen, for her part, plunged into her studies with an obsession that even frightened her teachers. She read everything she could get her hands on, did all her homework meticulously, and got the best grades in her class. When asked why she studied so much, she always gave the same answer: because one day I'm going to get out of here. And she did. But that part of the story was yet to come. For now, on that rainy Thursday night, as she and her mother huddled in a damp, cold room, not knowing how they would pay next month's rent, Helen made a silent promise. A promise that would shape every decision she would make from then on. She would return, not as the maid's daughter, not as the invisible girl who walked through the corridors without making a sound, but as someone who didn't need to ask permission to exist. As someone who would be seen, respected, heard, and when she returned, it would be on her own terms. The rain continued to fall throughout the night. Helen lay beside her mother, listening to Mrs. Lucy's heavy breathing, smelling the mold of the thin mattress. She closed her eyes and imagined the future, a future where she wouldn't be small, where she wouldn't be invisible, where she wouldn't need anyone to validate her existence. That night, the girl who had said she would be all his ceased to exist. In her place, a woman was born who would be above all entirely her own, and that woman still had much to do. The years that followed that rainy night were marked by a kind of silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence of a struggle that cannot be loud because there is no room for shouts. Mrs. Lucy and Helen learned to survive in the margins, in the corners, in the small miracles that appeared when all seemed lost. The room where they lived was in the Southgate Boroughs, one of London's largest and densest working-class areas, ironically nestled next to Mayfair, one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. From there, Helen could see the luxurious buildings, the houses with swimming pools, the tree-lined streets. It was as if two cities coexisted in the same space, separated only by walls, fences, and miles of inequality. Mrs. Lucy never fully recovered from the accusation, not just because of the difficulty in finding work, but because of the blow it dealt to her dignity. She had always been an honest, hard-working woman who believed that effort and character were enough. To discover that none of that mattered, when someone with power decided you were guilty, was too cruel. A lesson. She found sporadic jobs. She cleaned houses, ironed clothes, cared for the elderly. Nothing fixed, nothing with a proper contract, all informal, poorly paid, without guarantees. And her body began to pay the price. Pains in her back, legs, hands. The fatigue that didn't go away even after a full night's sleep. The shortness of breath when she climbed stairs. Helen saw everything. She saw her mother wake before sunrise, return when the moon was already high. She saw her calloused hands, her stooped shoulders, her distant gaze, and each time she saw it, the promise she had, made to herself on that rainy night, was renewed. She would not allow that to be the end of their story. The public school where Helen studied was a 40-minute walk from home. There was no money for bus fare every day, so she walked. She woke early, had coffee with bread and margarine when available, and went. Rain, sun, cold, heat. It didn't matter. She went. Her teachers soon realized she was different, not just because of her dedication, but because of her hunger to learn. Helen asked questions that went beyond the class content. She read books from the school library with impressive veracity. She borrowed textbooks from subsequent years to study ahead, and when the teachers had nothing more to teach, she sought knowledge elsewhere. That's how she discovered the local public library, an old, poorly maintained building with leaks in the ceiling and rusty shelves. But it had books, many books, and for Helen, that was enough. She spent every afternoon there after school. She read about history, science, literature, philosophy. She read about people who had come from unlikely places and reached impossible ones, and each story fed her certainty that she too could succeed. When she was 12, a literature teacher named Marianne noticed Helen's potential and enrolled her in a scholarship program for preparatory courses. It was an initiative by an NGO that offered free tutoring for low-income students. Helen was accepted, and there, for the first time, she came into contact with structured education, with specialized teachers, with classmates who also had big dreams. It was in this course that she met Raphael, a boy 2 years older, the son of a doorman and a cleaner who wanted to be an engineer. They quickly became friends. They studied together, exchanged books, talked about the future. Raphael was pragmatic, focused, determined. Helen was a dreamer, but no less determined. They balanced each other. Raphael was the first to talk about university entrance exams, about the possibility of getting into a public university, studying for free, earning a degree that was worth something. Helen had never thought about it concretely. University was for rich people, for people who studied at private schools, for people who had time and money to prepare. But Raphael insisted it was possible. "You're smarter than half the privileged kids I know," he would say. "If you prepare properly, you'll pass." And Helen believed him, not because she thought it would be easy, but because she had no other option. Either she found a way to change her life through studies, or she would be stuck in her mother's same reality. At 14, Helen started working. She wasn't legally old enough, but necessity doesn't wait for the law. She woke at 4 in the morning, helped distribute flyers at traffic lights until 7, rushed to school, attended classes, went to the preparatory course in the afternoon, and sold candies on the subway at night. She got home at 11, studied, until 1 in the morning, slept 3 hours and started over. Mrs. Lucy begged her to stop. She said it was too soon, that she was too young, that she needed to rest. But Helen didn't stop. She knew that every pound she earned was one less pound her mother needed to earn. And every hour her mother rested was an hour her body had to recover. The years passed like this. Helen grew up. She ceased to be the small, shy girl and became a tall, slender teenager with a firm, determined gaze. She had no time for parties, for dating, for the things other girls her age did. She only had time to study, work, and survive. When she turned 16, Helen enrolled in a government program that offered full scholarships for technical courses. She was accepted into a business administration course. Classes were at night, at a vocational training centre in East London. She took the bus, 3 transfers, an hour-and-a-half commute. But she went. It was in this course that she discovered she had a knack for business. She liked understanding how companies worked, how money circulated, how strategic decisions were made. She especially enjoyed learning about startups, about companies that started from scratch and grew rapidly. It was as if each success story was proof that it was possible to get from where she was to where she wanted to be. Raphael, who was now studying civil engineering at a state university, remained her closest friend. They saw each other on Saturdays, when both managed to get a day off. They talked about dreams, plans, ideas. Raphael wanted to set up a construction company focused on affordable housing. Helen didn't yet know exactly what she wanted, but she knew she wanted to be big. She wanted to have a voice. She wanted to be heard. It was Raphael who suggested she enter a social project competition promoted by a startup accelerator. The theme was accessible education. Helen hesitated. She had no experience with this kind of thing. She didn't know how to write a project. She had no connections, no contacts, nothing. But Raphael insisted. He said she had the best possible credential. She knew what it was like to need accessible education. Helen spent 2 weeks working on the project. She wrote during the early hours of the morning, after returning from work. The project was simple but solid, an online platform that connected low-income students to free educational content created by volunteers with a focus on preparation for university entrance exams and technical courses. The idea wasn't revolutionary, but it was practical and viable. She sent the project without much expectation. But 2 weeks later, she received an email saying she had been selected among the 10 finalists. She would have to present the project in person to a panel of entrepreneurs and investors. Helen panicked. She had never given a formal presentation. She had never been in a room with entrepreneurs. She didn't have suitable clothes. She didn't have an executive demeanor. She had nothing those people would expect to see. Mrs. Lucy, upon hearing the news, sold the only gold ring she owned, a memento from her mother, and bought a simple business outfit for her daughter. Black trousers, a white shirt, a grey blazer. Helen cried when she saw her mother doing that, but Mrs. Lucy held her daughter's face in her hands and said firmly, "You go there and show them who you are." The presentation was in an elegant auditorium on Oxford Street. Helen was trembling when she went up on stage, but when she started to speak, something changed. She forgot her nervousness. She forgot she was wearing clothes bought with her mother's last valuable possession. She forgot she came from the working-class periphery, that she didn't have the fluent English of the other candidates, that she hadn't studied at a private school. She spoke with passion. She spoke about education as a right, not a privilege. She spoke about the children who, like her, had potential but no opportunity. She spoke about the waste that is living in a country where talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. When she finished, there was a silence, then applause, not those polite, courteous claps, genuine applause. She didn't win first place, but she won third. And more importantly, she won something that money can't buy, the attention of people who could help her. One of the judges, an entrepreneur named Robert Foster, sought her out after the event. He had a social business accelerator and was impressed with her presentation. He offered mentorship, access to resources, connections. He said he believed in the project and wanted to help bring it to life. Helen accepted, without hesitation. The following months were intense. Robert introduced her to other entrepreneurs, investors, education specialists. She learned about business modeling, fundraising, technology, marketing. She learned in 6 months what would take years in a traditional university, and the platform began to take shape. With Raphael's help, who mobilized engineering colleagues to develop the website, and other volunteers who believed in the cause, the platform was launched. It was called Free Knowledge. Initially, it had few users, but Helen didn't give up. She promoted the project in public schools, NGOs, communities. She talked to students, teachers, parents. And little by little, the number of users grew. 10, 50, 100, 1,000. In 6 months, there were 5,000 active users. In a year, 20,000. The press began to notice. A local newspaper ran a story about the platform, then a national website, then a television program. Helen became, without realizing it, a symbol. The girl from the periphery who created a successful social startup. With visibility came investors, small at first, then larger. Robert helped structure the investment rounds, negotiate contracts and protect Helen's interests, and Free Knowledge grew. It ceased to be just a simple platform and became a company with a team, headquarters and revenue. Helen was 19 when she was invited to speak at a private university in London. It was an event on social entrepreneurship, and she would be one of the main speakers. She accepted, despite her nervousness. She had already spoken in public many times, but always to popular audiences, to public school students, to communities. Speaking to middle and upper-class university students was different. She went up on stage and spoke for 40 minutes. She told her story without victimhood, but also without hiding where she came from. She spoke about her mother, about working from an early age, about the obstacles, and she spoke primarily about the waste of potential that occurs when opportunities are limited by social origin. At the end, the audience rose to applaud, and it was there, in that moment, that Helen realized she had achieved something that years ago seemed impossible. Respect. Not because she came from a wealthy family, not because she had studied in the best schools, but because she had proven, with hard work and intelligence, that she was capable. After the lecture, several students approached her. They wanted to know more about the platform, about how they could help, about how they could learn from her. Helen talked to each one, answered every question, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. Not because she was in an elite environment, but because she was being recognized for who she was, not for the surname she didn't have. Among the students was a girl named Juliana, who introduced herself as an intern at a major investment firm. She said the firm's senior partner was looking for social projects to invest in and asked if Helen would be interested in presenting free knowledge. Helen said yes. 2 weeks later, she was in a meeting room in a mirrored building in Canary Wharf, the financial heart of London. The room was enormous, with a glass table that reflected the ceiling lights, leather armchairs, a panoramic view of the city. Helen entered with the blazer her mother had bought years ago, now a little worn but still presentable, and a folder with the printed presentation. There were 3 men in the room. 2 were junior investors. The third was the senior partner, a man in his 50s, grey-haired, impeccably dressed in a suit, who introduced himself as Edward Miller. Helen presented free knowledge with the same passion as always. She showed numbers, metrics, social impact, growth potential. The investors asked technical, financial, strategic questions. She answered all of them confidently. In the end, Edward Miller said he was impressed and would like to invest. But he had one condition. He wanted Helen to agree to participate in a development program for social entrepreneurs that his firm sponsored. It was an intensive 6-month program with classes, mentorships, networking. Helen accepted without hesitation. It was during this program that she met people who would change her trajectory, other entrepreneurs, executives, academics. And it was there too that she learned about the corporate world more deeply. She learned that money is not just currency. It is power, it is access, it is choice. When the program ended, Helen was 20 years old, and Free Knowledge had 100,000 active users. The platform had grown beyond her expectations. It now offered not only educational content, but also mentorships, online courses, and connections with companies that offered scholarships and internships. It had become a national reference, and with growth came invitations to participate in panels, events, conferences. Helen accepted them all. Every lecture, every interview, every public appearance was a way to amplify Free Knowledge's message and to show that it was possible to come from humble beginnings and go far. It was at one of these events, an education congress in Manchester, that she met Marina, an entrepreneur from Scotland who had founded one of the largest networks of private schools in the north of the country. Marina was impressed with Helen's story and asked if she would be interested in expanding Free Knowledge to other regions. Helen said yes, but that she needed capital for it. Marina offered investment, and it wasn't a small investment. It was enough to triple the operation. Helen accepted, but with one condition: she would maintain majority control of the company. Marina agreed. She said she didn't want to control, she wanted to support. With the new investment, Free Knowledge grew exponentially. It opened offices in 5 regions, hired a team of 50 people, and forged partnerships with universities and companies. In 1 year, it had 500,000 users. And Helen, at 21, was one of the youngest and most successful social entrepreneurs in the country. The press began to call her a phenomenon, an example of overcoming adversity, an inspiration for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Helen received dozens of messages a day from people thanking her, asking for advice, telling their own stories, and she tried to answer them all, because she knew that each message represented a person who, like her, was trying to build a path where there was no road. It was in this context that the invitation that would change everything arrived, a formal email sent by the communications department of the Albuquerque Group, one of London's largest business holdings. The group was organizing a Congress on Innovation and Social Impact, and they would like to invite her to be one of the main speakers. The event would be held at the group's headquarters in Kensington Gardens and would bring together entrepreneurs, investors, and opinion leaders. Helen read the email 3 times. The surname Albuquerque was there, clear as crystal. After 13 years, it was back. She didn't respond immediately. She closed her laptop and sat in silence, looking out the window of Free Knowledge's small office. Outside, London continued its frenetic routine. Cars, buses, people, all going, all coming, all trying to survive, grow, succeed. Helen thought of the 8-year-old girl who had been expelled in the rain. She thought of her unjustly accused mother. She thought of the young man who had hesitated, who had remained silent, who had chosen his surname instead of justice. And she also thought of who she had become, No longer the invisible girl, no longer the maid's daughter, but Helen Oliver, entrepreneur, speaker, reference, someone who didn't need to ask permission to exist. She opened her laptop again and typed her response, "I accept the invitation." Then she saved the email, closed the computer and left. At the office, she had a meeting with investors an hour later. She had an interview for a podcast in the afternoon. She had 1,000 things to do. But first, she needed air. She needed to walk. She needed to think. Because she knew that by accepting that invitation, she was agreeing to return to the place from which she had been expelled. But this time, not as someone asking for help, as someone offering solutions, and that made all the difference. The day of the Congress dawned grey. London awoke under a sky laden with low clouds, the kind that threaten rain but can't quite decide to fall. Helen looked out the window of the apartment where she now lived, a modest but comfortable two-bedroom in Notting Hill, and felt her stomach clench. It wasn't nervousness about speaking. She had already spoken in public dozens of times. It was something else, something deeper, older, something that came from an 8-year-old girl who still existed somewhere inside her. Mrs. Lucy was in the kitchen preparing coffee. Her health had improved in recent years, ever since Helen had managed to pay for a health plan and adequate medical care. The pains persisted, but now they were treated. And most importantly, she no longer had to work to exhaustion. Helen had insisted that her mother stop accepting cleaning jobs, and after much resistance, Mrs. Lucy finally agreed. Now she dedicated her time to taking care of the house, cooking, doing the things she always wanted but never could. "Mum, the Congress is today," Helen said, entering the kitchen. Mrs. Lucy turned, her face filled with concern. "I know, daughter. Are you sure you want to go?" Helen nodded. "I need to. But that house, that family..." Mrs. Lucy hesitated. "They hurt us. I know, and that's exactly why I need to go. Not to get revenge, Mom, but to show that we survived, that we grew, that we are no longer those frightened people who were expelled in the rain." Mrs. Lucy hugged her daughter tightly. "You are so strong, Helen. Stronger than I ever was." "I'm strong because I learned from you," Helen replied, feeling her eyes sting. After coffee, Helen prepared carefully. She chose a simple but elegant navy blue dress that she had bought especially for professional events. She tied her hair in a low bun, applied light makeup, and put on heels that made her seem taller and more confident than she actually felt. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was far from the girl of 13 years ago, but her eyes were the same, determined, firm, unbreakable. The Congress began at 9 in the morning. Helen took an Uber to Kensington Gardens. As the car drove across the city, she watched the streets gradually change scenery outside the window. From Notting Hill, with its graffiti and pubs, to Kensington Gardens, with its ancient trees and imposing mansions, it was like traveling between two different countries within the same city. When the car stopped in front of the Albuquerque Group building, Helen took a deep breath. The building was modern, glass and steel, different from the old mansion she knew. But the surname on the sign was the same, Albuquerque, in large golden letters, impossible to ignore. She got out of the car, adjusted her dress, and entered. The reception was spacious, with high ceilings, marble floors, and minimalist decor that screamed discreet wealth. There was a check-in counter for the event, where several people were queuing. Helen joined. Them picked up her badge, a folder with the program, and was directed to the auditorium. The place was packed. There must have been about 300 people, mostly middle-aged men in impeccable suits. There were also some women, all impeccably dressed, with that elegance that comes from years of access and privilege. Helen felt momentarily out of place, but she pushed the feeling away. She had as much right to be there as any of them, perhaps more. She found a seat at the back of the auditorium and sat down. The program indicated that she would be the third speaker after a renowned economist and an executive from a multinational corporation. She had about an hour before her presentation. That's when she saw him. Daniel Albuquerque walked onto the stage to give the welcome address. Helen recognized him immediately, even after 13 years. He was taller, more filled out, with a well-trimmed beard and precisely cut hair. He wore a dark grey suit that certainly cost more than Helen earned in a month when she started Free Knowledge. But it was him. The same eyes, the same way he slightly tilted his head when he spoke. The same, voice now deeper, but still recognizable. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice amplified by the microphone. "It is an honor to welcome you here to the Albuquerque Group for this Congress on Innovation and Social Impact. This is a crucial moment for our company, for our sector, and for our country. And that is why we decided to gather some of the brightest minds and some of the most inspiring projects to think together about the future." Helen listened, but didn't process the words. She was focused on trying to understand what she felt. Anger? Resentment? Indifference? She couldn't define it. It was a confusing mixture of all that and something more she couldn't name. Daniel continued speaking for a few more minutes, presenting the day's program and thanking the sponsors. Then he stepped down from the stage and sat in the front row, next to other executives from the group. The first lecture began. The economist spoke about macroeconomic scenarios. The second lecture was about digital transformation. Helen paid attention, but a part of her mind was elsewhere, preparing for the moment she would have to go up on that stage and speak in front of Daniel. When her name was called, she calmly stood up, walked to the stage, and climbed the steps with firm strides. She positioned herself behind the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked at the audience. And it was there, in that second, that her eyes met his. Daniel was looking directly at her, and on his face there was something Helen didn't expect to see. Recognition, surprise, and perhaps, just perhaps, a touch of shame. "Good morning," Helen began, her voice firm. "My name is Helen Oliver. I am the founder and CEO of Free Knowledge, an accessible education platform that today serves over 500,000 low-income students across the UK. She paused, letting the information sink in. Then she continued. "I grew up in the Southgate boroughs, the daughter of a domestic worker. I studied in public schools, worked since I was 14, and I know firsthand the barriers that inequality imposes on people with potential but without opportunity. Free Knowledge was born from that experience. It was born from the understanding that education cannot be a privilege, it must be a right." She spoke for 25 minutes. She told the platform's story, showed data, impact, growth. She spoke about the challenges of entrepreneurship without a support network, without initial capital, without the doors that open easily for those with a known surname. And she spoke primarily about hope, about how it is possible to transform realities when the right tools are offered to the right people. When she finished, the audience applauded. It wasn't that polite, courteous applause. It was genuine, warm. Several people stood up, and among them, hesitantly, was Daniel. Helen thanked them, stepped down from the stage, and was immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk, exchange cards, ask questions. She interacted with everyone, maintaining professionalism, but a part of her was aware of Daniel's presence as he slowly approached. When they finally stood face to face, there was an awkward silence. "Helen," he said, his voice low, I didn't know you would be here." She looked at him calmly. "I received the invitation. I thought it would be interesting to accept." "It was an excellent lecture," Daniel said, and there was sincerity in his voice. "I had no idea you had built all of this." Helen gave a small, joyless smile. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Daniel. Life went on after that night." He swallowed hard. "Helen, about that day, I wanted to have—" She raised her hand, interrupting him. "This isn't the place or the time for that conversation." "I know, but I would like to talk, if you'd accept. Can we have lunch or coffee?" Helen looked around. There were people waiting to speak with her, waiting to speak with him. All of this was bigger than the two of them. All of this had to be handled carefully. "Perhaps," she replied. "We'll see." And she moved away, returning to interact with the people who wanted to meet her. Daniel stood still, watching her leave. and felt the weight of 13 years fall upon him all at once. The rest of the day was intense. Helen participated in panels, talked to investors, gave interviews. But at every moment, a part of her was conscious of Daniel's presence. He also moved around the event, greeting guests, talking to partners, but his eyes frequently returned to her. In the late afternoon, as the event was ending and people began to leave, the Albuquerque Group's press officer approached Helen. She said that Mr. Albuquerque would like to invite her to a small dinner, just some of the speakers and strategic partners, at a nearby restaurant. Helen hesitated but accepted. Refusing would be strange, and she didn't want to give the impression that she was avoiding someone. The restaurant was an elegant and discreet place, specializing in contemporary British cuisine. There was a table reserved for 15 people. Helen was strategically placed next to an impact investor and across from Daniel. The dinner began with cordialities, introductions, polite conversations about the event. Helen participated when necessary, but was more observing than speaking, and what she observed was interesting. Daniel seemed tired, not just physically, but in a deeper way. There were wrinkles around his eyes that shouldn't be there on a 28-year-old man. There was a tension in his shoulders, an invisible but perceptible weight. He smiled politely, talked with guests, but there was something automatic about it, as if he were playing a role. It was during dessert that the conversation turned to the future of the Albuquerque Group. One of the investors, a man named Paul, asked directly about the company's expansion plans. Daniel hesitated before answering. "We are in a moment of strategic restructuring. We have faced some challenges in recent years, especially with portfolio diversification, but we are optimistic about the coming quarters," Paul pressed on. "But is it true that the holding company is seeking new investors?" Daniel smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "We are always open to strategic partnerships that make sense for the group." It was a diplomatically vague answer, but Helen understood what wasn't said. The company was in trouble. It wasn't a public crisis yet, but it was serious enough that they were organizing events to attract investors, to appear relevant, to show that they were still important players in the market. "Interesting," Helen said, actively participating in the conversation for the first time. "And what kind of partnership would make sense for the group at this moment?" Daniel looked directly at her, and for an instant, the executive mask fell. There was vulnerability in that gaze, almost a silent plea. "Partnerships that bring not only capital but also strategic vision, especially in areas where we don't have traditional expertise, like social impact, for example." Helen nodded slowly, processing. "I understand." The dinner ended shortly after. People began to say goodbye, exchange cards, schedule future meetings. Helen was picking up her purse when Daniel approached her again. "Can I give you a ride?" he asked. "My car is outside." Helen thought about refusing, but part of her wanted this conversation. She wanted to understand what had happened in the last 13 years. She wanted to see the man he had become. "All right," she replied. They left together. The car was a black sedan, discreet despite being obviously expensive. Daniel opened the door for her, then walked around and got in on the driver's side. He started the car but didn't move immediately. "Where to?" he asked. "Notting Hill," Helen replied, giving the address. He nodded and began to drive. For a few minutes neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, laden with everything that hadn't been said. "Helen," Daniel finally began, "I thought about you so many times over the years. I wondered what had happened to you, to your mother. I tried to look for you, but—" He stopped, not knowing how to continue. "But," Helen prompted. "But I didn't know how. I didn't know where to start. And I was afraid of what I would find, or what I wouldn't find." Helen looked out the window. The city streets passed quickly. "We survived. It was difficult, very difficult. My mother never got another permanent job after that accusation. She was marked, and I had to grow up too fast. I'm so sorry." And he seemed genuine. "I didn't know it had been so bad." "You didn't want to know." Helen turned to him. "You had a choice that day, Daniel. And you chose to side with your grandmother. You chose silence." I know. And not a day goes by that I don't regret it. I was young, I was scared, I didn't know what to do. No. But that's no excuse. I failed you, I failed your mother, and I'm truly sorry. Helen felt the sincerity in his words, but sincerity didn't erase 13 years of consequences. Thank you for apologizing, she said, but apologies don't change the past. I know, but maybe they can change the future. She looked at him, curious. What do you mean? I mean that... He hesitated, searching for the right words. I would like a chance. Not to go back to the past, because that's impossible, but to build something different, to prove that I'm no longer that scared kid. Helen remained silent, processing. The car was already arriving in Notting Hill. Daniel, she said finally, I didn't come here today looking for reconciliation, and I didn't come looking for revenge. I came because it was the right thing to do professionally. And it was interesting to see how life took us to such different places, but brought us back to the same space. So, is there any chance we can see each other again? To talk for real? Helen thought. Part of her wanted to say no, to close that door for good, but another part, a small but persistent part, wanted to understand. She wanted to know what he had become, what he carried, what he felt. I'll think about it, she replied, and I'll give you an answer. The car stopped in front of her building. Helen opened the door, then turned to him once more. Daniel, one last thing. Yes? That necklace. Have you found it yet? Daniel looked confused. No. Why? Because I'm sure it will appear, and when it does, a lot will change. She got out of the car and entered the building without looking back. Daniel stayed there, watching her leave, feeling that something important had just begun, or restarted, or ended for good. He wasn't sure, but he knew that Helen Oliver was no longer the girl he had known. She was much more, and that both scared and fascinated him at the same time. Meanwhile, Helen went up to her apartment, found her mother waiting anxiously, and told her everything. Mrs. Lucy listened in silence, holding her daughter's hand. And now? She asked at the end. Now, I think, Helen replied. But this time, I think on my terms, not his. Helen didn't sleep well that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The reunion with Daniel had affected her in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't anger. It wasn't resentment. It was something more complex. It was the feeling of being faced with a chapter she thought she had closed, but which in truth had never truly been concluded. The next morning, she woke early and went straight to the Free Knowledge office. She had meetings scheduled, decisions to make, a company to run. But a part of her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the Albuquerque Group, the financial crisis. Daniel had tried to disguise the opportunity that represented. During breakfast with Marina, her investing partner who was in London for a series of meetings, Helen brought up the subject. Marina, have you heard of the Albuquerque Group? Marina took a sip of coffee before replying. Of course, it's one of London's oldest family holdings. They operate in several sectors: real estate, education, logistics, if I'm not mistaken. Why? I met the heir yesterday at the Congress, and it seemed to me that the company is going through difficulties. Marina frowned. Interesting. Let me see what I can find out. I have some contacts in the financial market who might have information. I'd appreciate it. 2 hours later, Marina returned with an informal report she had obtained from an investment analyst. The scenario was not good. The Albuquerque Group was, in fact, in a delicate situation. Over the past 5 years, the company had made a series of risky investments in sectors it didn't dominate, trying to diversify its portfolio. But the bets hadn't paid off. Several projects had failed, draining resources. And now, with growing debts and stagnant revenues, the group was vulnerable. The family still maintained majority control, but there were rumors that some minority investors were pushing for changes in management. What's more, there were indications that if the situation didn't improve in the coming quarters, the family might be forced to sell significant parts of the company to cover debts. Helen read the report carefully. Then she looked at Marina. Is it possible to buy shares in this company discreetly? Marina studied her for a moment. Technically, yes. We can use a holding company, structure the operation in a way that it's not obvious who is behind it. But Helen, this would require a lot of capital, and it would be a risky investment. I know, but I think it's worth it. It's not just about money, it's about... She hesitated, searching for the words. It's about closing a circle. Marina nodded slowly. I understand. Leave it with me. I'll talk to our lawyers and the investment team. We'll structure this properly. In the following weeks, everything was set in motion. Marina coordinated the creation of a holding company called Horizon Holdings, which was officially linked to a social impact investment fund. The structure was legal, transparent to regulatory bodies, but not obvious to outsiders. And, through this holding, they began to buy shares in the Albuquerque Group. It wasn't easy, the shares weren't traded in large volume, so they needed to be strategic. They bought from minority investors who were discouraged by the company's performance, from funds that were restructuring their portfolios, from distant family heirs who wanted liquidity. Small parcels, discreetly, over 8 weeks. During this period, Helen and Daniel saw each other 3 more times. Always in professional contexts, always with other people around. He invited her to lunch twice and she accepted. The conversations were cautious, respectful, but laden with a subtext that neither of them mentioned directly. Daniel spoke about the challenges of managing a family business with so much historical weight, about the pressure to maintain a legacy, to honor the surname, not to be responsible for the end of something that generations had built. Helen listened and, at times, offered insights. She had experience in startups, in rapid growth, in pivoting strategies. It was a different universe from his, but the principles of management, leadership, and strategic vision were transferable. "You're much smarter than I imagined," he said during one of the lunches, with a smile that was both admiring and melancholic. "I've always been smart, Daniel. You just weren't paying attention." He lowered his eyes. Touché. At the end of the 8th week, Marina entered Helen's office with a victorious smile. "We did it. We have 15% of the Albuquerque Group's shares." 15% was enough. It wasn't control, but it was influence. It was power. It was a guaranteed seat on the board. Helen took a deep breath. "So now, we make it official." "Exactly. We'll notify the board of the change in shareholding as required by regulation, and you, as a representative of Horizon Holdings, have the right to appoint a member to the advisory board." "Myself," Helen said without hesitation. "Are you sure?" Marina asked. "This will expose you. It will be obvious that you are behind the holding." "I know, but it's time to stop acting in the shadows. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it head-on." The notification was sent on a Thursday afternoon. The next day, Helen's phone rang. It was Daniel. "Helen, we need to talk." His voice was tense, confused, almost irritated. "About?" "About the 15% of shares that a company called Horizon Holdings just bought from my company." Helen paused. "And what do you want to know? Who is behind it?" "I am." Silence on the other end of the line. "You?" Daniel finally said, his voice low and disbelieving. "I am. Through a legal and transparent structure. And as a shareholder, I will be taking a seat on the advisory board, as is my right." "Helen, why?" "Because it's a good investment. Because I believe the company can be turned around with the right management. And because..." She hesitated. "Because I can." Daniel didn't know what to say. "Did you do this for revenge?" "No. I did this because, unlike what happened to me 13 years ago, when I make a decision, I have the power to execute it." The first advisory board meeting took place 2 weeks later. It was a Friday morning, in a meeting room on the 10th floor of the Albuquerque Group building. The room had a panoramic view of the city, a huge solid wood table, leather chairs, and air conditioning that made the environment too cold. There were 7 people at the meeting. Daniel as CEO, 2 executive directors, 2 representatives of other minority shareholders, and Mrs. Beatrice Albuquerque, the matriarch, who still maintained a consultative role in the company, despite officially stepping down from management years ago. When Helen entered the room, the silence was immediate. Mrs. Beatrice recognized her instantly, Her aged but still haughty face paled. "You." Helen walked to her designated chair and sat down calmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Albuquerque. It's a pleasure to see you again after so many years." "What are you doing here?" The matriarch's voice was sharp, full of indignation. "I am here as a representative of Horizon Holdings, a shareholder with 15% of the company, exercising my legal right to participate in this board." "This is absurd." Mrs. Beatrice turned to Daniel. "Did you know about this?" "Yes," Daniel replied, his voice tired. "And it's all within legality. There's nothing we can do. She cannot be here. This woman, the daughter of that—" "Be careful what you say," Helen interrupted, her voice calm but firm, "because defamation has legal consequences, and I am no longer a scared child who accepts accusations without proof." Mrs. Beatrice opened her mouth to reply, but Daniel raised his hand. "Grandma, please, let's maintain professionalism." The meeting proceeded, tense and uncomfortable. Helen participated actively, asked pertinent questions about the financial figures, questioned recent strategic decisions, suggested alternatives to the problems the company faced. It was evident that she had deeply studied the situation, and it was also evident that she knew what she was talking about. The other board members, initially skeptical, began to listen to her more attentively. Her suggestions made sense. Her questions were relevant, and her outside perspective from someone who had built a company from scratch brought insights that traditional management lacked. At the end of the meeting, as everyone was leaving, Daniel asked to speak, with her alone. "Helen, I need to understand, are you really here to help, or are you waiting for the right moment to—" "To do what, Daniel? Destroy the company? Humiliate your family?" "Something like that." Helen looked at him for a long moment. "Daniel, if I wanted revenge, there would be much more efficient ways to get it. I'm here because I saw an investment opportunity, and because I believe I can help turn this company around. But I won't lie and say there isn't a personal satisfaction in this. There is. To be sitting at that table being heard, being respected, in the company of the family that expelled me as if I were trash. Yes, that gives me a certain satisfaction." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But Daniel, understand one thing. I don't need revenge. Revenge would be me destroying you. What I want is much simpler. I want you to see that you were the ones who were wrong 13 years ago. Not me, not my mother. You." In the following months, Helen immersed herself in the restructuring work of the Albuquerque Group. She proposed cutting unnecessary expenses, selling non-strategic assets, and renegotiating debts. She also suggested new business lines, partnerships with technology companies, and modernization of processes. Some of her proposals were accepted, others resisted, especially by Mrs. Beatrice, who saw every change as a betrayal of the family legacy. But the numbers began to improve, slowly but improve, and with that, the resistance to Helen diminished. The other board members began to see her not as an intruder, but as a valuable ally. It was during this period that Helen re-encountered Sebastian, the old butler of the mansion. He was retired, living in a modest apartment in North London. Helen sought him out, driven by a combination of nostalgia and curiosity. When he opened the door and saw her, the old butler's eyes filled with tears. "Miss Helen?" They talked for hours. Sebastian said he had retired 5 years earlier, that his health was fragile, that he lived on a small pension. And in the middle of the conversation, almost inadvertently, he mentioned something that would change everything. "You know, Helen, I always knew your mother was innocent," Sebastian said, his voice heavy. "That woman was the most honest person I ever met." "Then why didn't you say anything at the time?" "Because I was afraid of losing my job, my security. I was a coward, just like young Daniel." Helen held the old butler's wrinkled hand. "It wasn't your responsibility, Mr. Sebastian. But I could have done something, and I didn't." He hesitated, then stood up with difficulty. "By the way, there's something you need to see." He went to a cabinet, rummaged through old papers, and returned with an envelope yellowed by time. "What is this?" "It's a letter, from Daniel. He gave it to me to deliver to you a few months after that night. But Mrs. Beatrice found out. She intercepted me, took the letter, and forbade me to talk about it. She said if I told anyone, she would fire me without a reference. I kept this copy hidden all these years. I think now is the time for you to read it." Helen took the envelope with trembling hands. She opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter with the shaky handwriting of a teenager. "Helen, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to write. I need to say that I am truly sorry, so very sorry. That day, when you asked for my help, I was afraid. I was afraid of my grandmother, of what she would think, of what she would do. I was afraid of disappointing the family. And because of that fear, I disappointed you, and I disappointed your mother, who was always kind to me. I wish I had been brave. I wish I had gone down and told my grandmother she was wrong. I wish I had protected you, but I didn't, and now it's too late. I hope you are well. I hope your mother is well, and I hope one day you can forgive me, even if I don't deserve it. Daniel." Helen read the letter 3 times. She felt her throat tighten, her eyes sting, but she didn't cry. Not any more for that. She thanked Sebastian, promised to help him financially, and left with the letter tucked into her purse. That letter changed something in her. It didn't erase the resentment, it didn't nullify the years of suffering, but it humanized Daniel. It showed that he hadn't just been the cowardly boy who stayed silent. He had also been the boy who felt remorse, who tried to redeem himself, even if late, even if frustrated. It was 2 weeks later that the discovery that would definitively change everything happened. The Albuquerque group was undergoing a major renovation of the old family mansion in Kensington Gardens. The house had been transformed into administrative headquarters years ago and now needed structural updates. During the demolition of a wall on the 2nd floor, the workers found something unexpected. A wooden box embedded in the masonry, sealed and clearly intentionally hidden. The construction manager, not knowing what to do, called Daniel. Daniel opened the box in the presence of witnesses. Inside were old documents, photographs, and wrapped in black velvet, a diamond and emerald necklace. The necklace. Daniel froze. He carefully picked up the piece, examining the tag still attached to it. It was the family necklace, the same one that had disappeared 13 years ago, the same one that cost Mrs. Lucy her job and her reputation. He felt his stomach churn. Helen was informed the same day. Daniel called her personally. When she arrived at the mansion and saw the necklace on the table, accompanied by a photographic report of where it had been found, she felt a mixture of anger and relief. It was proof. Concrete, undeniable proof that her mother had never stolen anything, that the accusation had been a lie, a setup. But who had done it? Who had hidden the necklace? The answer came when Daniel confronted his grandmother. Mrs. Beatrice was in the office when he entered, without knocking, holding the necklace. "What is this?" she asked, feigning surprise. "You know very well what it is," Daniel said, his voice hard. "It's the necklace you said Mrs. Lucy had stolen. It was hidden in the wall on the 2nd floor, inside a sealed box, and the only person who would have access to do that was someone from the family." Mrs. Beatrice paled. "That's absurd. It must have been... It was you." Daniel's wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "You hid the necklace. You framed Mrs. Lucy. You destroyed that woman's life knowing she was innocent." Silence. "Why?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you do it?" Mrs. Beatrice stood up, trying to regain her composure. "Because it was necessary. That woman was letting her daughter get too close to you. You were getting too attached to that child. It was inappropriate. It was dangerous. I did what was necessary to protect this family." "Protect?" Daniel shouted. "You destroyed an innocent family to feed your prejudice." "I did what any mother would do. I protected my grandson from a friendship that would lead to no good." Daniel stood looking at her, feeling a mixture of revulsion and disappointment. "You are not the woman I thought you were." And he left. The extraordinary general meeting was convened a week later. It was necessary to officially inform the shareholders about the discovery, its legal implications, and the measures that would be taken. The room was full. In addition to shareholders and board members, there were lawyers, press representatives who had been discreetly informed, and legal authorities. Helen was in the front row, next to her mother, who had been specially invited for that moment. Daniel went up to the stage, held the microphone, and began to speak. His voice was firm but emotional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have convened this assembly to address a serious matter. Recently, during renovations at the old headquarters of the Albuquerque Group, a necklace of historical and financial value was found, which had been reported stolen 13 years ago. At the time, an employee, Mrs. Lucy Oliver, was accused of this theft without concrete evidence and dismissed under this false allegation. The discovery of the necklace intentionally hidden in the walls of the mansion proves unequivocally that Mrs. Lucy was innocent. More than that, internal investigations revealed that the necklace was deliberately hidden by someone from the family to unjustly incriminate her. The murmur in the room was immediate. People whispered, looked around, trying to process the information. Daniel continued, "On behalf of the Albuquerque Group, I would like to offer a public and formal apology to Mrs. Lucy Oliver and her daughter, Helen Oliver, for the moral, financial, and psychological damages caused by this false accusation. We are preparing adequate financial compensation and will take all necessary legal measures to redress this injustice." He paused, then looked directly at where Mrs. Beatrice was sitting, rigid and pale. "Furthermore, I inform you that Mrs. Beatrice Albuquerque, who admitted to being responsible for hiding the necklace and making the false accusation, is being removed from any consultative or decision-making role in the Albuquerque Group and will be held legally accountable for her actions." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, someone began to applaud. Then another person. Then more. And in a few seconds, half the room was applauding. Mrs. Lucy cried silently next to Helen. Helen held her mother's hand tightly, feeling 13 years of injustice finally being acknowledged. Daniel stepped down from the stage and walked over to them. He knelt in front of Mrs. Lucy. "Mrs. Lucy, I am more sorry than I can express. What my grandmother did, what I allowed to happen by omission, was inexcusable. But I hope that, with time, you can find in your heart some form of forgiveness." Mrs. Lucy looked at him with tear-filled eyes. Then she reached out and lightly touched his face. "You were a child, Daniel, scared and manipulated. Forgiveness is easy. Forgetting is hard." He nodded, emotional. Then he turned to Helen. "And you? Can you forgive me?" Helen looked at him for a long moment. "Daniel, forgiveness is not something you get. It's something you build, with actions, with changes, with time. I will spend the rest of my life trying to build that. Then start now." He nodded. Among those present at the assembly was also Gabrielle, Daniel's fiancée, an elegant woman from a traditional family who had been with him for 3 years. She had watched everything in silence, processing every word, every revelation. When the assembly ended and people began to disperse, she approached Daniel. She asked to speak privately. They went to an empty room. Gabrielle closed the door and stood facing him. "You knew about this?" "Knew about what? The letter my grandmother intercepted? The hidden necklace?" "No. I found out along with everyone else. And that woman, Helen. Who is she to you?" Daniel hesitated. "She was a friend. When we were children, someone important." "And is she still?" He didn't answer immediately. And the lack of an answer was answer enough. Gabrielle nodded slowly. "I understand. Look, Daniel, I love you, but this whole weight, this unresolved past, this guilt, I don't know if I can carry this with you. You have a lot to resolve, a lot to set right, and I think you need to do that alone." She took off her engagement ring and placed it on the table. It wasn't with anger. It was with sadness. And she left. Daniel stood there, alone, looking at the ring on the table, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to cry. The days that followed the assembly were intense. The press covered the story extensively, not only because of the revelation about the necklace and the false accusation, but because of what it represented. Another example of how power can be used to destroy the weakest, and how truth, even if it takes years, eventually comes to light. Helen refused most interview requests. She didn't want to turn it into a spectacle. She just wanted the truth to be recorded and her mother's dignity restored. Mrs. Lucy, in turn, was more relieved than vengeful. After 13 years of carrying the weight of an unjust accusation, she could finally breathe without the stigma. The financial compensation offered by the Albuquerque Group was generous, enough to ensure that Mrs. Lucy would live the rest of her life without worries. Helen did not want the money for herself. She said she had built her life with her own hands and did not need financial reparations, but she accepted it on her mother's behalf because she knew it represented more than money. It represented recognition, respect, justice. Daniel plunged into a period of intense reflection, the revelation about his grandmother, the end of his engagement. The weight of everything that had happened plunged him into a kind of existential crisis. He began to question everything: the role he played in the company, the legacy he was trying to preserve, the meaning of honor when his own family had acted dishonorably. He sought Helen out several times in the following weeks, sometimes to discuss company matters, sometimes just to talk, and little by little, between board meetings and impromptu coffees, they developed something that was no longer the friendship of childhood, but also not just a professional relationship. It was something new, undefined, built on the rubble of the past but trying to look to the future. It was during one of these conversations, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, sitting in a cafe in Notting Hill, that Daniel finally opened up completely. "Helen, I've been thinking a lot about all of this, about my life, about the choices I've made, about who I've become." She took a sip of her coffee, waiting for him to continue. "And I realized that I don't like the man I am, or rather the man I became trying to be who the family expected me to be. I always did what was expected. I studied what my father studied. I took over the company because it was my obligation. I got engaged to Gabrielle because she came from the right family, had the right surname. But at no point did I stop to think about what I really wanted. And what do you want, Daniel?" He looked at her with an intensity that surprised her. "I want to be free, free from the surname, from the legacy, from the expectations. I want to build something of my own, not something that was given to me. I want—" He hesitated. "I want to be worthy of your friendship, of your respect." Helen was silent for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "Daniel, you don't need my approval to do that. You need to want it for yourself. I know, but part of wanting it is knowing that you exist, that it's possible to do things differently, that it's possible to come from humble beginnings and build something real. You are living proof that a surname doesn't define who we are. And I want to learn from that. Then learn, but don't do it for me. Do it for yourself." In the following weeks, Daniel began to make decisions that shocked everyone. First, he announced that he was resigning as CEO of the Albuquerque Group. He said the company needed renewed leadership, someone less tied to the past. He appointed an external executive, someone with a solid track record in corporate restructuring. Most shareholders supported the decision. Some, including distant family members, resisted. But the decision was made. Then, in an even more radical move, Daniel renounced his inheritance. He formalized through legal documents that he was giving up any right to the family's assets, to the shares he would inherit in the future, to everything that came from the Albuquerque surname. He kept only a small amount he had saved over the years from his own salary, enough to live modestly for some time while he figured out what to do with his life. The news spread quickly. Some called him crazy, others an idealist. Helen, when she found out, wasn't sure how to feel. Part of her admired his courage. Part of her feared he was doing it for the wrong reasons. She sought him out. This time it was she who called, who asked to talk. They met in the same public garden where Helen used to spend some afternoons when she needed to think. It was a simple place, with wooden benches, old trees, children playing, far from the elegance of the places Daniel frequented, but more real, more human. "Daniel, what are you doing?" Helen asked as soon as they sat down. "I told you, I'm freeing myself." "Freeing yourself? Or running away?" He looked at her, confused. "What's the difference?" "The difference is that liberation is about moving towards something. Escape is about moving away from something. Are you moving towards something or just away from what hurts you? Daniel was silent, thinking. Maybe a little of both. And where do I fit into this? What do you mean? Are you doing all this because of me? Because of what happened? Because of what you think could have been between us? He lowered his head. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe. Maybe I'm trying to prove something to you. Or to myself. I don't know anymore. Helen took a deep breath. Daniel, listen. I forgive you. Truly. For what happened when we were children. You were 15. You were scared. You were being manipulated. And you suffered from it too. I see that, but... She hesitated, searching for the right words. But I won't be your salvation. I won't be the reason you reinvent yourself. Because if I am, you'll be building your new life on someone else. And that's not liberation. It's just an exchange of prisons. I'm not asking you to be my salvation. I'm just asking for you not to throw me away completely. I'm not throwing you away. I'm telling you that you need to find your own reasons, and when you do, if you still want me to be part of your life in some way, we'll talk. But now you need to find yourself alone. Daniel nodded, his eyes moist. You've always been wiser than me. It's not about being wise. It's about having learned, in the most painful way possible, that we can't depend on others to validate who we are. They sat in silence for a while, side by side, watching the children play. It was a comfortable silence, without the tension of previous encounters. Just two adults who had shared a painful past trying to figure out how to move forward. You know what's funny? Daniel said suddenly. When we were children, you said that when you grew up, you would be all mine. And I laughed, thought it was cute, but didn't take it seriously. Helen smiled slightly. I remember. And now, 13 years later, I've discovered that what I really wanted was to have been worthy of that. Worthy of the loyalty you offered when you were just a passionate child. But I wasn't. And now it's too late. It's not about being too late, Daniel. It's about that girl who said that not existing anymore. She grew up. She transformed. She went through things that changed her completely. And the woman she became belongs to no one, not to you, not to anyone else. She belongs to herself. Finally. Daniel looked at her, and there was something melancholic, but also understanding in that gaze. You are incredible, Helen, always have been. I was just too foolish to see it. You weren't foolish. You were human, with all the flaws and weaknesses that implies, just like me, just like everyone. They said goodbye that afternoon with a hug. Not the hug of two people starting something, but the hug of two people making peace with the past. It was laden with history, forgiveness, respect, but also with farewell. Daniel left London the following week. He said he was going to travel, see places, think, maybe take a course, learn something new, discover what he liked to do when there was no pressure to be an Albuquerque. Helen wished him luck, and she was sincere in her wish. Helen's life continued at its pace. Free knowledge was in full expansion. They had just closed a partnership with the Ministry of Education to bring the platform to public schools across the country. They were also developing specific content for rural areas, for riverside communities, for all places where quality education was scarce. Helen was being invited to speak internationally. American universities wanted to learn about the free knowledge model. European foundations wanted to invest. She was being recognized not only in the UK, but globally, as one of the most promising social entrepreneurs of her generation. But despite all the success, all the visibility, Helen remained fundamentally the same. She lived in the same modest apartment in Notting Hill. She took the bus when she could instead of an Uber. She had lunch at casual eateries. She talked to the students who used the platform as if they were friends. She didn't let success change who she was, because she knew that success is external, but essence is internal. Mrs. Lucy, with improved health and restored dignity, began to volunteer at an NGO that helped other domestic workers learn their rights. She transformed her pain into purpose, and Helen had never been so proud of her mother. Raphael, her childhood friend, had graduated as an engineer and was opening his construction company focused on affordable housing. Helen invested in his business because she believed in him, but also because she knew that was how you change the world. Not alone, but in a network. Not hoarding resources, but sharing opportunities. It was on a December night, almost a year after the assembly that had revealed the truth about the necklace, that Helen found herself alone in the Free Knowledge office. Everyone else had left. It was late. But she liked those moments of solitude where she could think without interruptions. She opened her laptop and began to write, not a work document, not a presentation, but something personal, a kind of letter to herself, or perhaps to the 8-year-old girl who still existed somewhere inside her. She wrote about the path she had traveled, about the nights of hunger, the days of tiredness, the moments of despair, but also about the victories, the achievements, the moments of joy. She wrote about her mother, about sacrifice, about the love that sustains even when everything falls apart. She wrote about Raphael, about the friendship that neither demands nor expects, that is just there. She wrote about Daniel, about forgiveness, about how it is possible to let go of the past without forgetting it. And she wrote primarily about herself, about how becoming whole had been the hardest and most important journey of her life, about how learning not to depend on external validation had been liberating, about how discovering that she was enough, alone without needing to be half of someone, had been revolutionary. When she finished writing, she saved the file with a simple title, All Mine. She looked out the office window. London shone below, with its infinite lights, its incessant movement, its contradictions. It was a tough city, unequal, unjust, but it was also a city of possibilities, of reinventions, of second chances. Helen turned off her computer, picked up her backpack, and left the office. She went down the elevator, passed through the empty reception, and stepped out onto the street. The night was pleasant, with a light breeze. She began to walk unhurriedly, just feeling. She thought about everything that had happened, about everything she had lost and everything she had gained, and she realized that, in the end, the greatest achievement had not been professional success, nor recognition, nor the gentle revenge of sitting on the board of the company that had expelled her. The greatest achievement had been to reclaim herself. It had been the 8-year-old girl who said she would be all his, learning that in truth she had always been all hers. She just didn't know it. She smiled at the night, at the city, at life, and she kept walking. Because now, finally, she knew where she was going, and she knew that regardless of who entered or left her life, regardless of the successes or failures yet to come, she would be fine, because she was whole, by herself, for herself. And that, Helen realized, was true freedom. Few months later, on a March morning, Helen received a letter. It came from Ireland. The sender was Daniel. She opened it with curiosity. Inside was a short letter and a photo. In the photo, Daniel was in front of a small bookstore, smiling. The letter read, Helen. I opened a bookstore here in Dublin. It's small, simple, but it's mine. I sell used books, make coffee, organize reading clubs. It's so different from everything I imagined for my life. But it's the first thing I've done that feels truly like my own choice. You were right, I needed to find myself alone, and I'm on my way. I'm not there yet, but I'm walking. Thank you for being honest with me. Thank you for not saving me when I wanted to be saved. Thank you for letting me fall, because it was by falling that I learned to get up on my own. If you're ever around here, there's a coffee waiting for you. With gratitude and respect. Daniel. Helen read the letter twice. She smiled. She put it in a desk drawer. Maybe one day she would go to Ireland. Maybe she would have that coffee. Maybe not. It didn't matter. What mattered was that both of them were, each in their own way, learning to be whole. And that was more than enough. Helen's story didn't end there, of course. She continued to build free knowledge, impacting millions of lives, changing realities. She continued to be a dedicated daughter to Mrs. Lucy, a loyal friend to Raphael and Marina, a mentor to dozens of young entrepreneurs who sought her inspiration. But if it ended anywhere, it was on that December night, when she finally understood that the girl who once said she would be all his had, in fact, always been all hers. It just took a few years, a few struggles, a few tears, and a few victories to discover it. And when she discovered it, everything changed, not because she became another person, but because, finally, she became completely herself. Dear listeners, we hope Helen and Daniel's story has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, forgiveness, and self-discovery, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what most resonated with you in this story. What would you do in Helen's place? How would you handle reuniting with someone who hurt you in the past? Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, speaking about second chances, about growth, about the strength that exists within each of us. We await you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life, on choices, on who we are, and who we can become.